Today's reading, thank you for having this prepared. Today's reading will be from 1 Peter 4, chapter 4, verses 7 through 11. The end of all things is near. Therefore be alert and sober-minded, so that you may pray. Above all, love each other deeply, because love covers a multitude of sins. Offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. Each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others, as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. If anyone serves, they should do so with the strength God provides, so that in all things God may be praised through Jesus Christ. And to him be the glory and the power forever and ever. Amen.
Good morning.
Morning.
Morning. Morning. I want to thank the Lord for having the gift of this day that we can come together and fellowship and enter praise unto Him. And the truth is, God has given us a lot of gifts in our lives. Just today, as I stepped away to kind of prepare my mind and get ready to give the talk today, listening to you sing, and that in and of itself was a gift. It was something that just hearing you and being able to be surrounded by the love of Jesus Christ is precious. He has given us the joy of this day. He has given us each other in fellowship as gifts. But one of the first gifts that He gave us after the creation was the entire world. If you turn to Genesis chapter 1, right in the beginning, verses 28 and 29, Genesis 1, verses 28 and 29. It states there, God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and every other living creature that moves on the ground." Then God said, "I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food." Everything that God created, He gifted to us. And He expects us to use that gift appropriately. He intends for us to care for it, to use it to His will and to His glory. And for a time, we don't know how long, the Bible doesn't tell us how long, but for a time we do. We enjoyed the fruits of His labor. We communed with Him directly in His presence. And we were given direct dominion and authority over the world. But then some things happened that changed a lot. We had the fall of Adam and Eve, which is to say the fall of all humanity. And there was exactly one way, just one, that we could take God's gift and use it in a way that was against His will. And we decided to use it in that way. For the promise of maybe for wisdom or for power or for knowledge, we used God's own creation against His will. Now, if we jump ahead about 40 books and 54 chapters, I counted them, from Genesis to Luke, we see Satan trying to tempt Jesus. Luke 4, verses 5 through 7, it says, "The devil led him up to a high place and showed him in an instant all the kingdoms of the world. And he said to him, I will give you all their authority and splendor. It has been given to me, and I can give it to anyone I want to. If you worship me, it will be yours." Now the New Testament reinforces this authority that the adversary now holds in this world. Jesus refers to him 3 separate times as the prince of this world. He's also referred to as the god of this world, the accuser of the brethren, the prince of the power of the air. Now, a question I get asked a lot, and it's especially from non-believers that are legitimately trying to understand why I believe in God, is why did God give Satan this power over the world? And the answer is surprisingly simple. He didn't. Something that is not said in any of those 40 books between Genesis and Luke is that God gave Satan authority in the world. The closest we get is in Job, and he had to ask God for the authority to affect just one man. And when that didn't work, he had to go back to God and ask authority again to be able to affect that one man's family. And each time that authority was given, after the task was done, God took that authority away. Because after the affliction of Job, Satan was not allowed to affect him again, not allowed to affect his new family again. Every time God gave Satan that authority, he put heavy limitations and removed them afterwards. So here is another thing that is never mentioned in those 40 books between Genesis and Luke, or after for that matter. Nowhere in the Bible does God ever relieve us of the responsibility of dominion over this world. We are the ones God intended from the beginning to have control over his creation. And we stepped away from that authority. Because to have authority over something means that you have to have responsibility for something. Even more than that, if it's going wrong and you have authority over it, then you have to take the blame for it. Is there anyone here that wants to take the blame before God for the state of his creation now at this point in time? Any authority, any power that Satan has that is functioning on this earth is only what man has chosen to give to him. We have chosen to take the power that God entrusted to us and to give it to his enemy. And that's not a very pleasant thought, is it? But it is true. Every time we took God's gifts and refused them, every time we took them and used them against God's will and purpose, we left that authority given to us unfulfilled. And Satan then filled that space. It might be something that is hard to accept or painful. Hopefully it is painful to accept. But it is true, and you can prove it to yourself. You can do that by imagining the opposite. Imagine if every single man, woman, child accepted the gifts of God that he has given us and uses them wholly and fully according to God's will alone. What power does Satan have in a world where all hearts and every action is devoted purely to God's will? In that world where we all reclaim the authority God granted us and use it for his glory and his glory alone, there is no power left for Satan. Now, the good news, the great news, the glorious news is that when our Savior Jesus Christ returns, that's how it's going to be. And even though we cannot achieve that perfect day, that perfect world, without the return of Jesus, we still have to fight for that every single day. We have to fight and do our very best to have this world where we and everyone that we can touch, affect, influence, speak to, turns to God and his glory. But fighting like that is hard sometimes. Most times, actually. Sometimes it's hard because, well, it's scary. You know, we can get scared that we may seem foolish, we may seem over the top. It may be that we are thinking, you know, it's not really the correct social setting, you know, polite people don't talk about this at these locations, at work, at whatever the case may be. It's just inappropriate to talk at this point in time. Or maybe it's we just don't have the energy to deal with it right now. We'll do better next time. We'll be more prepared next time. Sometimes it's hard because God's will for the gifts that he gave us is different than what we want. That is what is expected of us, though. If we go back to the reading, 1 Peter 4:10, each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. Which means we could use our charisma, if that is the gift that is given, to invite others to Jesus. Or we could use it to go talk to that pretty girl at the end of the bar. We could use the gift of leadership to help plan events to introduce others to salvation. Or we could use it to further our own careers. We could put this money that we earned towards a Christian cause. Or we could put it towards that boat. And by we, I mean me. It was back 20, 30 years ago now. You know you're starting to get up there when you have to isolate an event by what decade it occurred in. But I was having lunch with a friend of mine from the military. He was stationed at Fort Campbell still. I had been stationed at Fort Campbell. I had been restationed elsewhere. But I was coming through for some form of temporary duty assignment. I can't remember exactly what it was. His name was Tony Finley. I've talked to you guys about him a few times. He is what I refer to affectionately as my holy roller friend. He's the type that regardless of what setting he was in, when you turned the corner and he saw you, he was like, "Brother, praise the name!" He was unabashedly Christian, which is how it should be. So we were at this restaurant, we were eating and catching up, and we were just talking about stuff that soldiers talk about. You know, how our next promotion was looking, what the unit culture was like, what training missions were we going on, complaining about our leaders. Then Tony did something kind of weird. He hunched over and he looked down at his suit, and I mean like down. The only thing I could see was like the top of his head. And he took a breath, and then he looked up right into my eyes. And he said, "Chaun, you're using the gifts God gave you for your own purposes, not for His." To which I promptly replied, "Tony, I don't want to talk about this right now." And he lowered his head the exact same way, took another breath, and then he straightened back up and went back to the mundane conversation, not missing a beat, never brought it up again. So, even though he didn't push it, he didn't mention it again, ever, from that point on, those words shook me deeply, because I knew the absolute 100% truth of what he was saying. Unfortunately, it didn't shake me up enough to change my behavior. There's that old saying, you can't escape your demons when you're too busy enjoying their company. And that's kind of where I was at that point in time. But his words kept reverberating within me. The truth of it was just unavoidable. And then there was the response to that truth. "Tony, I don't want to talk about this right now." Now, if that is a reply that's sounding somewhat familiar to you, like you may have heard it before, I'm going to refer you to where my wife referred me to when she first heard this story. It's in Acts 24, verse 25. Acts 24, verse 25. As Paul talked about righteousness, self-control, and the judgment to come, Felix was afraid and said, "That's enough for now. You may leave. When I find it convenient, I will send for you." Now, God does not need to justify His actions. They are, by definition, right. But if He ever did want to justify just being done with me, well, that would have been the time. Fortunately for me, we have a very patient God. We have a very kind God. We have a God that is very slow to give up on any of us, even if we do fail Him in sometimes spectacular fashion. And I was slow to change. It was probably a good 10 years before I even began trying to more align my behavior to that of the teachings of Jesus Christ. Even then, it wasn't a full committal. I was still wrapped up in my desires. Knowing I needed a little bit better influence, I think, God brought Rachel back into my life, and she started to influence me a little bit more. God brought me to this congregation, and you guys started influencing me more. And then there was something inside me that snapped. Maybe it was my pride, maybe it was my selfishness, maybe my fear, most likely a combination of all of those things. And Yep, this is the trademark part of the So I called Rachel over to pray with me because I felt the need to have someone both hear my confession and to hear the promise that I was going to make. I acknowledged that I had spent my entire life running from what God had intended for me. I acknowledged that God had been very generous with his gifts for me in so many undeserving ways, and how I had used those purely for my benefit and no one else's, not his, not helping other people, for myself, my own gratification. But then I promised in prayer that I was done running. I know that I might have been too late, that God's purpose had passed me by, because it says in the Bible, if you do not do this, I will provide another. And that may have been the case with me, and I understood that. But I promised that regardless of what he had planned for me at this point in time, I was done running from it, and I would not run again. The next day, Larry pulled me aside and asked if I would consider being part of the rotation of speaking up here. And I was like, oh, you mean like now? That was, and I'll be honest, panic welled within me, and all the excuses came up. Well, I'm newer to the congregation, I'm not really well established, I'm not as learned as maybe I should be, I don't have a lot of time to devote to that like I should. But I knew what the true choice was. My choice was between I could stay and serve, or I could run and be proven a liar in front of my God. So, here I am. Now, on a side note, if you ever get a chance to play cards with God, do not bluff. He will call every single time. Every time. So, answering God's call, though, and following his will has been more fulfilling to me than any whim or desire that I followed on my own. And that is the absolute truth. Now, every person here has gifts that God has bestowed upon them. It may be the gift of charisma. It may be the gift of charity. Or it may be the gift of nurturing. It may be the gift of leadership or of serving. It may be technical knowledge or emotional knowledge or biblical knowledge. But every single one of us has been given the gift of God's love. And that is a gift that each one of us can give to others and never have it diminish our own. So there are some questions that I would like you to answer for yourselves. First of all, what are the gifts God has bestowed upon you? You have been given them, I guarantee that. Romans 12:4-6 says, "For even as we have many members in one body, and all the members don't have the same function, so we who are many are one body in Christ, and individually members of one another, having gifts differing according to the grace that was given us." So if you truly think on what God has given you, that you can use for his glory, I think you'll find that there are a lot more gifts than you thought you had at first. Second, are you using those gifts in a way that fulfills God's purpose? Now, if the answer is yes to that question, you have Matthew 25:21 to look forward to. His Lord said to him, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a few things. I will set you over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord." Now, another way of phrasing that question is, are you embracing the dominion that God has given you in this world and being a good steward of his creation and his glory? Now, if the answer is no, or I try to, or sometimes, or anything other than a resounding yes, that means we are leaving some of the authority God has given us lying on the ground, discarded. And Satan will come and take that power, the power entrusted to us, to try to use against God's glory, to try and use against God's children, to use against the unbelievers that God so desperately wants gathered into his flock. So I challenge all of us to take stock of our gifts and of our talents. Take the time to recognize them and to use them for the glory of God. Do not be the one that buries your talent. Do not be the one that covers up the light that has been given inside of you. Let your light shine before men so that they may see your good works and glorify your Father, which is in heaven. If any feel the call of invitation, please come forward as we sing.